Welcome back to the Humble Market Timer YouTube channel. Once again, if you enjoy the content, please like, comment, and subscribe. In today's video, we're going to talk about Bitcoin. How much more pain do we have to go? Now, Bitcoin has been struggling, as we all know. Earlier this morning or late last night, it hit about 80,000. So it has really been on a slide. Just to kind of give you some reference as to the level of the slide. Here is looking at the historical returns. Right now in November, we're looking at being down about 25%. That is a very unusually low number for Bitcoin. Just kind of looking at this chart, you can see we haven't had a month that bad since 2022. Also, this is a chart that kind of breaks down the monthly returns in Bitcoin dating back 2013. And so that's about 144 months. We've only had about 9 months out of that 140 something months where we've had a month this red. So pretty nasty time right now in Bitcoin. However, again, we hit about 80,000 earlier today, but we've had a bit of a bounce. We're back, as I'm currently doing this video, at around 84,000. Don't know if that will hold, but we have gotten a bit of a bounce, so that's a positive. But the main question is, how much longer do we have to go for all this negative price action? And it's very difficult to figure that out. But one of the guys who is very respected in the investment community, Tom Lee, he is sort of the face of Bitminer. And he has sort of come up with an idea as to how much longer we have to go for this slide before we can finally get a bit of a recovery. Let's listen to what he has to say.
In 2009, it was really the collateral wasn't secure in real estate and these packaged subprime mortgages. Now, the industry learned and they recoded that. I'm talking about Wall Street, but then regulators came in and like over-regulated. That was the negative effect of that. In crypto, this code of ADL and the way they pull prices is never going to happen again. The good news is we're not going to have over-regulation in crypto, but now we have to deal with that liquidation effect. 2022 was a big liquidation, and it took 8 weeks.
Now, he says this is very similar to 2022, and the liquidations and the downward price action took about 8 weeks. Let's see if we can kind of fact check him. If we go to 2022, I would think that he's referring to this price action right here. Again, this is a weekly chart of Bitcoin, and each candle represents 1 week. I would say that this was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, about 11 to 12 weeks. So again, just kind of fact check him. He says it took about 8 weeks. I'm counting more along the lines of 10, 11, or 12 weeks. Now, this also came on the tail end of already negative price action when we had its initial all-time high back at about 68,000 in late 2021. So that cascade of liquidations occurred after there had already been a pretty significant fall. So does that necessarily mean that it's going to take, in his opinion, 8 weeks based on our count, 10 or 11 weeks? Not necessarily, but I do believe that we are getting close to a bottom. When you see the price action, as I mentioned in other videos, we're starting to get closer and closer to support. I've mentioned several times about that 75-ish area, and there's like a sort of a buy window between 68, which was the all-time high initially, and then where we have a lot of price action here in that 75 range. So I believe in that 68,000 to 75,000, you could see a good bit of buyers willing to step in. Also, a very key thing, if you notice on the RSI, if you look at the chart, oftentimes Bitcoin bottoms when the weekly RSI hits in that 30 or less range. We're currently sitting at about 34. If you want to just kind of look at the history, you can see we had big bounces. Once we hit the bottom kind of in that area, again, the 30 area. Again, here, it was just above 30, but we bottomed here. Here again, hit about right around that 30 area. That was about the low. So we are approaching that 30, that key area of 30 on the weekly RSI. If you notice, I drew a parallel here. Again, oftentimes we have bounced off the bottom of the parallel and we are approaching the bottom of the parallel once again, which sits just below 30 on the RSI. So again, other indicators that are showing we're close. We may not be there yet, but we're getting close. I believe probably in the next week or so, it may be a good time to start nibbling and not necessarily putting it all in one position, but taking nibbles. And if we go lower, nibble a little bit more. If we go lower, a little bit more. Because I do believe when we have this much price action, when you pull it, the price coming down, the move back up will be just as violent. One other thing I want to point out, I don't think there's a big rush necessarily to buy unless we just get a massive flush down to that 60,000 area or maybe even that 50,000 area. In that situation, I do believe we would have a V-shaped recovery and bounce back very quickly. But historically, when Bitcoin does have these falls, again, this is a weekly chart, usually it takes a couple of weeks for it to get its bearings before it moves higher. You look here when it had a nice drop, to a couple of weeks went higher. You look here, big drop, to a couple of weeks went higher. So oftentimes you don't get immediate V-shaped recoveries in Bitcoin. That doesn't mean that won't be the case on this occasion, but generally speaking, it's more of a process and it's more of a marathon than a sprint when it makes its recovery. So I think all of us, if we're looking to get in, we will have time over the next week, 2, 3, 4 weeks to get in. Also, looking at the idea that we might have a big push in December since we have had such a downward pull down in November. There's a possibility that maybe we could have a stronger bounce just simply because we're at the end of the year and a lot of people are looking to get in. But I don't think you will necessarily be in a big rush to try to buy in to catch the bottom because typically, like I said, it's generally a process and not as much a sprint when we have that recovery. But if we do see more force down and we really start getting into those low 70s, high 60s, maybe even 50s, then I think you could expect a nice V-shaped recovery. Hope you like the content. If you like it, please like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.